G'day folks, today's a bit of an impromptu video. I've noticed I've had an oil leak for a little while. It's time to attend to that. And I've also noticed that my power steering fluid is low. On top of that, my bash plate is a bit damaged, and you know, there's been a bit of discussion about sort of whether the original is a good way to go, or there's other ways that are better. So I might look at that as well, and see how it all ties together. Now, before I go into that, I just want you to give a warm welcome to the new resident dolphins. There was a bit of a council clean-up, and someone had unbelievably decided that they would give these dolphins a new home. So I had to give them a home. And well, I guess that also means that I might be able to don my freediving gear and go for a dive with them occasionally. That would be great. Okay, so I've got the vehicle jacked up at the front so I can get under there. Apologies for it being a bit dirty under here, but I'll just start. As you can see here, I've got quite a woof in my bash plate. That's probably happened mainly because of one specific incident, but it certainly played a major role in lots of different adventures. And you can see here that sort of continued through to here, and basically this has been doing a lot of good work for me. One of the benefits of independent front suspension is that you have a higher diff. You can kind of toboggan through muddy terrain, and you can even just kind of slowly wheedle your way where there might be rocks, and if you go really slowly and just crawl along, well, it'll just either ride up or it'll kind of tell you, well, hang on, time to stop. So yeah, it's very effective. I don't have to worry about denting a diff housing. Okay, now you can see here, this is obviously aftermarket as part of my bar. Now this is actually an original, and all of this stuff is original. So you've got this plate here, and then you've got the four bars, and at a guess, that's probably 40 mil maybe. I should probably measure that, but that's quite a substantial beam. And so that can take quite a knock. Because it's not a super thick wall, it's not as heavy, it's not super heavy. Now if you look up here, you'll see that wolf has actually gone through and bent that crossbar, and that's very interesting. I didn't realize it was bent until I had a bit of a look under here. So it's probably time to grab another one of these, and you might be able to see here that it's now getting a bit closer to my sway bar. Now if I had an original equipment sway bar, it would be even closer. And you might even be able to see these ripples here. Now I believe that they're part of that that ripple there. So basically I was driving on at night time, and what looked like solid ground turned out to be soft, and it came down fairly hard. So basically the bash guard's done a really good job, in that regard. Now you can see here that, yes, you're losing that bit of ground clearance here. Well, at least compared to the cross member, you're losing, I'm just poking my finger up in there. So you're losing that much, and that's well, what is that? 35 mil, roughly. Now if you just put a piece of plate there or something, this would then hang lower, and that would cop more abuse. I believe that's the mount for the axle housing. So I'll just continue under here. If you can bear with me, because we might do a bit of sailing around. You can see all the oil under here, and what I've done is I've traced that back to this power steering hose here, and I noticed that this mounting lug has actually popped out of the housing. So I guess that's suggesting that this has taken a bit of a knock either once or a number of times. Obviously, if you're going through mud, it can come up through this grill, or sticks and rocks as well, when I can't see any physical damage. So I'm guessing it's more the soft targets that have just kind of wheedled at it, perhaps, or don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it's soft targets. So it can certainly be said that the bars, what some people call the cattle grid, haven't quite offered enough protection. But I mean, I have done quite a lot of forward driving. Now, this of course brings into question the whole cooling aspect. Now, I've obviously fitted this here, and they've put these holes in it. So it may be that in the original bumper configuration, there may be some degree of airflow that can come through here, and obviously you can see the airflow can come in here, and this is the engine sump, and you can also see that the bars are open here. So I would say that with a fair amount of confidence that you've got air circulating around and through here, which plays some role in cooling. Now, it may be that the V6 has got a different bash design, and that could be quite interesting to look at. So coming back under here, so you can see here, I guess that's quite obvious, that there's direct air access onto the sump, and that can obviously flow through and inside these areas in here. And there's the beginning of the transmission under there, which has copped oil from the power steering fluid, and then you get to here, and that's the pan for the automatic transmission. So there really is quite a lot of airflow, very little restriction ultimately, or a small amount of restriction ultimately to airflow. Now, being a vehicle that doesn't have low range in the automatic models, and yet it's a vehicle that you can treat like a four-wheel drive. So that is kind of one of the weak links, is the automatic transmission and whether that can overheat. So as far as I'm concerned, that's something that you do want to pay a lot of attention to, is cooling of the transmission, because of the risk of overheats. I mean, for me, it's only really happened a very small amount in the Victoria High Country, but I don't tend to load it up to like I haven't towed a trailer with this at all, and I don't tend to. When I did the Simpson, I was probably at gross vehicle mass, but I never go over the gross vehicle mass. So if you're someone that does that, then that's going to put more load on your transmission, and you'll have more risk of overheat issues, and therefore you'll need to pay more attention to transmission cooling, whether that's direct airflow or whether you decide to fit a larger external cooler, or a cooler with a thermo, separate one. There's all different ways to skin the cat. So yeah, so it's time for me to replace the power steering hose and top that system up. And I think I'll be looking for a replacement one of these. If anyone's got one, give me a buzz. Alrighty, I'm in Adelaide. So one big question you might have is, do I need to bash plate the under the transmission pan area between this cross member and this cross member? which is covered in oil from my power steering fluid? Well, good question. I mean, there's a fair amount of the pan is a substantial amount higher, quite a substantial amount. I mean, I've never hit that. I can't see any, and when I say I haven't hit that, I can't see any evidence of having hit that. It looks, if I clean that up, it looks like it would look like new. Being steel, might be stainless. It if you did hit it, well, it should flex and not just shatter like cast aluminium. Personally, I'm not too worried about that. Now, something that has happened to me is I did get a stick go up, and here here is your transmission wires, and they go over the top and that's them here. Now, I had a stick come up, a log. Someone had got stuck and they'd put a log in there to try and get themselves out for traction, and I couldn't see it under the mud, and it got flicked up and it damaged these wires. So, I mean, there's one argument, I guess, in favour of some kind of extra protection. The alternative would be that you could tuck it out of the way a little bit better. Mine's a little bit better tucked than the original. Obviously we fixed all that up, and I sort of tucked it a bit better. And something else to keep in mind is this is a fuel filter. Now that could definitely be classified as a vulnerable location. Who knows why they put it there? I mean, that's, yeah. Yeah, if you suddenly don't have any fuel after some off-roading, well, that could definitely be why. Obviously, if you put the bash plate over there, well, then you're going to have to take the bash plate off probably to be able to replace this fuel filter, which would be a bit annoying. I think possibly a better solution would be to actually relocate this under the bonnet where it should be, or at least where they normally are. I think there'd be a double benefit there. It'd be less vulnerable and easier to replace. So I guess there's options there. And where you've got this exhaust bracket here, these aren't tubes containing oil or anything. This is just an exhaust bracket, as you can see. Oops, as you can see. So I mean, those exhaust brackets aren't really something I would be too worried about. And as you can see, I mean, I've given this quite a good run off road, and it doesn't even look like it's touched anything. So in this area, the only thing I would personally be concerned about is that, and if you're concerned about that, consider putting it under the bonnet. There's an electric pump in the fuel tank which provides the fuel at pressure, and I don't see there's anything stopping you from putting the filter up under the bonnet. It's all a pressure system, so it's not as if this is relying on any gravity feed. It's when you replace the filter, it's not going to fill up by gravity from the fuel tank. You need to pump it in there with the pump. Yeah, that's a given. So I don't see any reason for this to be here from any kind of gravity perspective. And now, technically, if you read the official manual, you are supposed to take off the bash plate to do an oil change. That's a sump there, and
I'm not aware of anyone that actually takes this off. The dealer told me that they came up with a workaround. I personally think Volkswagen have deliberately made most servicing jobs harder than they should be, because they want you to take it. They don't want you to do it yourself, and they don't want you to even take it to any other service agent. They just want you to take it to their Volkswagen dealership. What you'll find if you haven't done an oil change yet is when you open this off, the pressure will fly it over the top of this, and it'll come down over here somewhere. And then as the oil level in the sump gets lower, the pressure will reduce, and then it'll hit in a different spot, and it'll come down a different spot, and then it'll hit again, come down a different spot, and it can actually sort of dance around a bit and splash and make a hell of a mess and really annoy you. I haven't come across an explanation yet for why some drain plugs are suddenly coming out to the side rather than down below, which is the way they used to do it, and which worked beautifully. But yeah, that's kind of another video. But obviously, in terms of that bash plate, if you put a bash plate over here, well, yeah, you're going to have to take it off, or come up with, I think there are exhaust fittings or something like that, come up with a tube that comes out over here, and then you can do your oil changes over here or something like that, depending on where your bash plate goes. And while we're under here, I guess I'll just point this out. Now there's diff drop kits available, and I haven't seen one myself yet, and I might be seeing one soon, so it'll be interesting. What I noticed now, maybe this bar is bent on mine, so it's probably not a good judge. I can't actually fit a finger under there. That's a differential there. I can't fit a finger, so I've heard that you have to put 5mm of spacers under here to space this down when you do a drift drop kit. But so I mean, anyway, it's really meaningless, because I don't know if this is bent. But if this wasn't bent, then I'd kind of be spacing this down, wanting to space this down almost as much as the diff drop itself. I think it's a 27mm drop, so for me, I'd be wanting to space this down almost 27mm. So I don't know, it's I might find out more soon. Okay, so I've been having a bit of a think about this leaking hose. I found out that it's a low pressure hose, so it doesn't require a super high pressure fitting, and I got quoted a new price for one of these from Volkswagen, for an original one, genuine, at around the $250 mark. Now you could and I thought, well, hang on, I've damaged this because the location is somewhat vulnerable, and I could spend that money and then damage another one. So I thought, well, hang on, maybe there's a better way. And I thought about, well, cutting this tube and buying some new hose and attaching it, and then I thought, well, actually, if I could liberate some of the existing hose, I could possibly cut it and cut it there, and just join it without even buying. Sorry, cut it here and just join it without buying any new hose. If I can liberate about 2.5 inches or 2 3/4 inches, then I'd be right. I wouldn't have to buy any parts other than hose clamps. And so I had a look up here, and you can see here, and I realized that if I just unclip this as a demonstration, see, I mean, this rotates, but this doesn't. So I can actually bring this down at a much lower angle, bring this down rather than bring it down near the bar here. I can take it higher and you might be able to see, probably not, but that I could actually liberate a lot of extra hose that way. And the idea would be that rather than having it underneath the high pressure line, I could flip it over and have it on the upper side. I can hose clamp it on possibly, or whatever I want to do there. It did occur to me that if I did buy new hose, that I could cut it up here somewhere and take all of the hose into a less vulnerable location. Yeah, I mean, that's possible. I sort of like the fact that you've got this coming out of here and then it's being stabilized here. I mean, if you were going to cut this off somewhere, well, I mean, you can, and then run your hose off it. But, well, I mean, you're still spending money to do that. Whereas if I can just basically cut that out, that section out, and if it happens to be that, see, this tube is around 10 millimeters overall diameter, this might well be 10 millimeters internal diameter, or a bit less if we're lucky, and I may well be able to just poke that over the tube and clamp it up. And obviously I don't want it to fail anywhere, but it shouldn't. It's only the low pressure hose, so it may be that I end up with what amounts to a better solution with no real outlay, as opposed to spending $250 and ending up with something that's just as vulnerable as what I've already damaged. So what I would do here is I would just slide this along the fixed tube, and then that would be it would relocate this in that manner, which would get you more hose. So I'll see how that goes. I decided I'd take the old bash plates off, and that would make the job of fixing the power steering hose a little bit easier. And so you can see here the Rhino alloy bash plate. I'll have a go at that with a hammer, see what happens. I have got a press as well. There's plenty of force around, see what happens. I would guess that this is now stretched, and if I flatten that out, the bolt holes may not line up with the holes that were drilled in this, in here, but if I'm putting a new bash plate in, that doesn't matter. And well, even if I was reusing the old one, I could just re-drill it. But so now you can see what's happened. So I'm pretty sure that's not meant to look like that. So yeah, there's quite a bit of load's been applied here. Thankfully you've got these tough bars behind here. So you got this bar here, and then you got the tough bars behind it. So it's taken it. It's been damaged, but it's taken it. Nothing else has been damaged. So I'm not too unimpressed. Okay, my idea was that I got the angle grinder and I just cut through that, and without draining the fluid first, the idea was that the bits of metal the bits of metal grit from the cut would get flushed out of the pipe by the remaining fluid. I didn't know how much was left, but I found out there was a reason why it left. So yeah, there shouldn't be any metal material in either of these pipes because of what's drained out. And yeah, so the next step is I'll cut this, and then I'll feed this over the top so it's out of the way more, and hopefully I'll be able to get enough to slide it over here and put some clamps on there. And you would have noticed in the past that this was located around here, and I got the angle grinder and I cut through that, and I allowed the remaining fluid to drain out there, and I would say it cleared out any of the swarf, any of the little bits of grit from the cutting. And I use the angle grinder again, but next time I would just use a hose cutter. It looks like I've cut the hose, the tube, but actually I think I've just gone along the end of it. But yeah, next time, because it's well supported, a hose cutter or a Stanley knife would cut that nicely and not create much in the way of residue that you might be worried about getting into your hydraulic system. So once that's off, there is another component that was sitting on the tube, which was what connected into here. I just took that off. I decided I didn't want or need that. And so then the hose previously was over the top of all of this, and that's partly what made it vulnerable. And so I fed the hose over the top instead, and then down through that gap and to here. So thankfully there's heaps of hose to do it. There really is. You know, I easily got it over here, which means that I've fed it over all of that extra tube, and really quite easily. There's basically, this has come across under here to give me the extra tube. But it's fine. I mean, I got, masses of clearance everywhere. If anything, it's in a better location than where it was. Now, this plastic clip here, I'll try and zoom in a bit. That was interesting because I was struggling to get it back on, and then I realized that this part actually swivels relative to this part. So, brilliant little thing. You can just swivel it around until it works. So that's located nicely. I left this thing on exactly in the position it was. I didn't bother moving it in any direction. What it has resulted in is that it just keeps a little bit of a gap here in there. It keeps that sort of nice clearance there. So I think it sits in there nicely. You can see that this is touching here, but these components are basically moving in the same sort of, they're all attached to each other. I mean, this is attached here to this housing, so they shouldn't really be rubbing relative to each other, and not to any degree. I mean, maybe you get slight vibration, but I mean, I could easily cable tie that if I was worried, but I'm not. No, just in this kind of situation, I definitely recommend using 2 hose clamps. And thankfully the hose is quite thick, so you can really kind of squish it on. It is a slightly loose fit on this tube. The internal diameter of that hose is a little bit larger than this, but because it's got a thick wall, I think because I've used 2, I've done them up quite tight. I'm pretty confident that's going to work. If it doesn't, well, then there's more you can do, but I'm pretty confident that'll work. So yeah, that's now job done. So I've, apart from refilling it with fluid, so I've now got this out of the way a lot more than what it was, and I haven't had to spend. I've just saved $250. So you could do this as a repair out in the middle of the Simpson Desert if you needed to. Basically, the hose is there. You only need basic tools. So if you had that leak there, like I did, then you can fix it. No drama. Well, I didn't think it was a big deal to drain out that line. But then the joys of a modern vehicle, I go in and they say, well, there is some chance you might need more than 1 litre. And, well, the 2 of these cost $75. Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully I'll only need one. I happened to be having a look at this, and I noticed that it's actually indented here. So, I mean, I already knew that this section is bent and that this section is bent, but a bit more of an inspection has revealed a bit of indenting here and here against the cross member. So, and this wall here is blown out. It's I don't think it's fully welded. There's a section there that's not welded, and under the forces it's kind of blown out to the side. So what this does for you is those bigger loads, it will absorb it and not reduce the risk of damage to the cross member. It's interesting, but you could also argue that it's point loading the cross member. So if you had a larger surface area on the cross member, then the loads would be spread over a larger area, and it would actually, as such, strengthen the cross member. So yeah, it's interesting. I chucked it on the scales, and it weighs 14 kilos. It weighs 13 kilos this time. Maybe I've kicked out a bit more mud, or just the way it's sitting on the scales. So there you go. So I filled up the reservoir of power steering fluid, and thankfully there's no leak. Nothing's coming out. So that's looking good. I've turned the steering full lock left and right without the motor running, and then I started the engine and I turned it full lock and back. So it looks like at this stage that's going to be good. And thankfully I've used a bit less than 1 litre, so it's still $37 or so worth of power steering fluid. I did have another idea which I'm not too sure if it would work out, and now that I've filled it up I'm not going to bother doing it, but I had the idea that if so this is the low pressure tube, and this one is still somewhat vulnerable, or at least it is hanging down more than most other things in this area. And I had the idea that perhaps if I let's see if I can get it in the video. Yeah, if I loosen this off, I might actually be able to rotate this in this direction. You just have to try it. It may not work. And try and sort of get this to actually go over the top of that one. That may be interesting. Although, I mean, you can always take it out, and it may be that it's willing to sit down here, which would feed in nicely to where you could take this tube. But yeah, until I try it, I really don't know if it would work, but it's just an idea, and it would clean the area up a bit, reduce any vulnerabilities. Now I was toying with the idea of just grabbing another second-hand bash guard and just going with another original one. But I looked on eBay and there was one for $155 for a Wrecker. So if they're going to cost $155, well, I mean, I might just chuck the old one back on for now, and I'll keep thinking about it. It'll get me by, and I can assess whether I want to make something for myself or grab another one or repair the one I've got. Something else I'll mention while I'm down here, my bash guard was actually never screwed in these two locations. It was only screwed in here and here. And that just seemed an oversight to me during manufacturing. I did mention it to my dealer, and I didn't really get a great response, I don't think. I think he said that it wasn't meant to be attached, but I mean, there was holes here, holes in the bash guard, and I think that's quite important from a strength perspective for that to be bolted in. It's going to make the bars, I mean the bar is pretty loosely held in if you don't have these bolted in, because it's not bolted to this cross member. It only ever just sits under here. So when I got under here once, and I think I managed to tuck a nut in there, pretty keen, hey, and get it to start. And then I decided that was a bit awkward. So, but I did manage to get that to tighten up. What I did is I applied a downward load, which made the nut have pressure against this bottom plate, and that stopped it from spinning, and then I could actually tighten it up. And I used the same process to get it off. But for this one, I decided to weld a tab onto a nut. I think you'll find here when I was undoing it, I discovered the tab flapping around. And so that's another way. I don't know where the tab is right at this moment. Oh, I can feel something. There it is. I can feel a tab. I'm kind of half of a mind to get a tap and just tap a thread and use a larger bolt. I mean, but yeah, this isn't very thick steel, but it is maybe, I don't know, it might be 2.5 mil or something. So I'll have a look at that and make a decision when I put it back together.
So it's back together, and it's a partial job done. It's all ready to rock and roll. I just need to put it down on the ground and do a final check on the level of the power steering fluid. So yeah, I had to re-drill these holes because of the panel beating I'd done on this, and didn't do any work to the actual original guard. And I added the extra hole, which was never put there by the installer. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You might be able to see here how this one is higher up than the two on the right, and this one is possibly a little bit higher as well, not as much, but basically these two are supported by the cross member underneath the engine, this cross member here, and these two aren't. It's almost as if the guy that designed the cross member was a different person to the one that designed this. And when this guy designed this, he didn't go back to the guy that did the cross member and say, hey, can you do things a bit differently? Because I think if they worked together, they would have come up with a better result. So I'm not going to do anything about that for now. I haven't got time. But what I will do is roll around underneath and show you how the power steering setup came out. Okay, you can see here this line is still somewhat vulnerable, and here this is all in the same original location, but now that I've got this curving up here, it used to go in the same plane as the other side, but it's now curving up and out of the way. So basically I've saved all this area, and I haven't had to spend any money apart from power steering fluid, which I was going to have to buy anyway. So following on from what I was saying about the cross member, you can see here this is resting up there, so it provides full support to this bar. Same here, rests up under there, provides support to the bar. Here you can see I can get a finger in there. Looking from this side, we can see that there's still
a gap. It does touch here, but I think it only touches there because it's bent. This is the one that's up higher than all the rest, so it's only touching there because it's bent. And this one, it's probably bent, but it's still a long way from touching. It's I don't know how bent it is. It's still a nice distance from the diff, but not a large distance.
Well, that's it for this video, so catch you next time. See you later.